All right, so before I go on, I just want to show everybody, right? Because our textbook didn't do a great job, right? Some of the diagrams are a bit too cartoony, I have to say, right? So I need to show everybody a bit more, brain images. So first of all, I will start with the hindbrain. Why do I start with the hindbrain instead of the forebrain? Yeah, because in the field, right, it is thought that when our brain starts to develop, right, in our mother's womb, right, the hindbrain is actually the very first, right, to develop. Surprise, right? So it grows from the bottom, like it's like a mic, like a microphone, and then we have this cerebellum, right? So that is actually the first organelle, right, that starts to develop. And then later on, it grows in size, it grows outwards, right? It's like a balloon that inflates itself, right? And then, yeah, so the second part will be the midbrain. Um, in Latin, we call it mesencephalon, right? So hindbrain, the mesencephalon. If you really look at the Latin root, right, you would know that meten actually means anterior, right? Not the fore. Even though like English, when it comes to English, like fore means okay, that should be anterior, but no, huh? So mesencephalon is like the anterior brain, yeah. And then telencephalon, right? Telencephalon means like the end brain. If we do a literal translation into English, right? So in other words, there is just discrepancy, right? There is this incoherence between the Latin word and the English word, right? And that so this is a confusing part when it comes to studying neuroscience. Yeah, certain words do not really conform to each other, right? So processing, learning, memory, attention, right? Excuse me for the R, right? Right. So that's the purpose of our the cerebellum, right? We'll talk a little bit more, right, about cerebellum in our tutorial tomorrow, right? And then there's also ASD, right? That one is really for our upper modules, right? So we do have certain smaller volumes in the hindbrain, a bit unfortunate, right? Yeah, I would also say like maybe yeah, in the inferior neocortex as well, right? Usually people with certain all these different kinds of psychological disorders. I mean, if they happen to be severe, they tend to have smaller brain volumes, right, compared to healthy individuals, so-called healthy individuals, right, without such psychological disturbances. And now we look at the midbrain, this mesencephalon, right? So we have a lot of sub-regions again, right? But I just want to show everybody, we have this thing called tegmentum, and then we have this tectum. So if you look at the Latin root, right? So tectum means roof, dorsal part, right? If it's dorsal, what does it mean, right? And then if it's ventral, what does it mean, right? So I will just point my mouse cursor here, right? Hopefully my mouse cursor is working, right? So if everybody can see here, right? So yeah, so this one is here, right? So tectum, dorsal part, right? So this is actually the dorsal part, okay? So that means if you're like touching, the bone, right? That is at the top of your neck, right? You're touching the dorsal part, right? Yeah. And then if it's more anterior, right? If it's closer to your throat, right? That will be the so-called ventral part, right? Yeah. And why is it like that? Yeah, so yeah, dorsal because when we look at certain animals, right? When we look at shark, when we look at dolphins, right? There's this thing called a dorsal fin, right? Yeah. So it's kind of picture, so just picture yourself, okay, like swimming, right? You're in a swimming position, right? Correct? Yeah. And then so yeah, the part of your back that really protrudes out, right? Yeah. So that will be the dorsal part, right? So whatever that's kind of coming underneath it, right? From that horizontal view, right? When you're kind of swimming, right? Yeah, anything that's kind of inferior to it, that would be the ventral part, right? Yeah. So you have to do a 90-degree mental rotation in your mind, in other words, right? Yeah. Okay, so that's like so that's more like the coordinate section, all right? Now I just want to talk a little bit about this substantia nigra, right? So this is a region, okay? This region, I think you guys learned this thing during the pre-recording. It is associated with Parkinson's disease. So we have neurodegeneration, right? When neurodegeneration occurs, right, in the substantia nigra, you get disturbances in the production of dopamine, right? So when you don't really have, sufficient dopamine, you will get Parkinson's disease, right? So you'll get involuntary movement, right? Tick-like movement of your fingers, not good, right? You couldn't really control your facial expressions that well, yeah. So that's Parkinson's, yeah. Superior colliculi, yeah, that's a plural. So it's basically a cluster of um, nuclei, right? Along our brainstem, we have thousands of nuclei in our brainstem, right? Which really just look like a mic, yeah. It just looks like a microphone, yeah. And according to classical research, I mean, it's supposedly to orient our body towards visual stimuli, but I don't think it's really that distinct. Yeah. So sometimes the function of superior and inferior colliculi, I mean, they do overlap with each other. So yeah, do not take this thing as a Bible, right? So this is still pretty much an ongoing research, right? But so far, it's kind of you understood that the basic orientation for all this colliculi, right? All this nuclei, they're just highly involved, right, in visual, auditory processing. Yeah. So right now, I think possibly my this superior and inferior colliculi, they're firing away. They're firing action potentials away, right? Because I have to orient myself. I have to control my pitch, control my voice. Yeah. That's how it works. And now we turn to the forebrain, right? The telencephalon, right? So from Latin, it's actually the end brain. Yeah. And then we have this thing called the diencephalon, right? We talk about this thing, right, in the recording, right? What the thalamus is for. The thalamus is like a relay center, right? But importantly, it's pretty much involving anything that is conscious, is cognitive in nature. Yeah. Um, and I always like to tell some of my other students, right? Um, Actually, strictly speaking, the thalamus is a midbrain. Yeah, it's at the center of our brain. Yeah, the center of the neocortex. But for reasons unknown, I think it was a mistake. It was a mistake that stayed until this day. Yeah. So this part, what I'm pointing at right now, tegmentum, tectum, the top part of our brain stem, right? This is what we call the midbrain. It doesn't look anything like the midbrain. Okay. Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more right tomorrow. So this is extremely surprising. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a mistake that never got corrected in neuroscience. Yeah. And hypothalamus, right? Hypothalamus is involved in regulation, physiological state of our body, right? Of internal physiological state. And then we need it to regulate our sleep, right? Without it, there's no way we're going to have stable sleep cycles, right? We need the hypothalamus. And then it also controls our reproductive glands, our endocrine system, and then control our autonomic nervous system, right? Yeah, if you guys remember, autonomic nervous system, right? What does it comprise of? Comprise of our sympathetic nervous system, our parasympathetic nervous system, right? Yeah. So basically, I would say these are the crucial. I mean, diencephalon, definitely. I mean, these two regions are hyper crucial, right? To just maintaining a homeostasis